Three decades ago, as a working mother of two, I wrote a column about memory loss and an inability to focus, and how my conversation with other young mothers had us concluding that our inability to finish a sentence was basically because our attention was constantly being diverted by our small children, and that this was a mothering issue. Well, today my guest is a prominent Singapore-based entrepreneur who serves as a CEO of a modern next-generation business school called NewCampus. And Will Fan is a busy man. You know, he's busy with work and he's busy with family as a new father. And we're going to hear what's changed and maybe what's not changed so much when it comes to keeping it all together as a young parent. But first, let's listen to the column that he chose that I wrote on this topic 30 years ago. Losing your way down memory lane. I don't know, maybe I'm nuts, or maybe I just need a snootful of black pepper and a couple of stress tabs, which is what my aromatherapy encyclopedia recommends for lack of concentration and memory. Sorry, what was I talking about? It really hit me yesterday afternoon after a parent-teacher meeting at my school. We'd been discussing ways to get my kid to focus on completing tasks when I suddenly realized that in describing some of the tactics we were using at home, I'd not completed one single sentence. Well, we do have a series of chores that have to get done I guess the thing to do is to try and get to start at the beginning, and then over the summer, we could look at a journal, or the thing is to really get that little mind focused, isn't it? Apples don't fall too far from the tree. I can remember my mother describing her mind as a sieve. These days, mine's more like a black hole. Information gets sucked in, never to be found again. And it isn't just me, I am relieved to report. Most of my women friends, almost all of whom have kids, have complained of an increased inability to finish a thought. What scares me is that once I've dialed the phone to make that important call, I've not only forgotten what I wanted to say, I can't remember who I was calling. We've pretty much determined that this is a byproduct of procreation. Last weekend, I was discussing the problem with a friend as we sat by a swimming pool and watched our kids. I got fed up with this craziness and I went and had my brain washed, she announced. Got myself hooked up to a sort of electronic Martinizing device, and an hour later, clean as a whistle. You won't see the results. They actually printed out a before and after chart for me. Gee, Marge, what does... Yes, Gracie? Lovely swimming. Good girl. Very nice. Kick. Sorry, Marge, what was I saying? Oh, yes. What exactly does the chart show? I asked, one eye on the Little Mermaid and the other on the brain chart. Well, she said, this bit up here shows my alpha waves, and these here are my... Timothy, don't you spray us with that. Shoot it at Daddy. Daddy likes the water gun. Sorry, what was I saying? We stared at each other for a beat and then looked down at the paper she was holding. Right, Marge began again. That section there is my learning and information gathering bit. And all that stuff that looks like the Himalayas, well, that's just garbage mostly. That's the junk they get rid of for you. But what if they sort of bulk erase the wrong junk? See, this is my husband's great fear, that during a frenzy of spring cleaning, I'm going to throw out the wrong box of junk. And then, when the day comes when he actually needs 7 sets of broken Walkman earphones... Gracie! Careful! Careful not to kick the elderly... Are you all right, sir? God, I hope those weren't his own teeth. I became aware of a conversation that was working its way towards a black hole. Quick! Finish telling me about your brain, I cried in panic. If we don't come to the end of this story soon, it is going to be lost forever. Yes, my brain. I had it something. And it wasn't a bad thing. It was a good thing. And the reason I had it done was because it needed, I've got it back now. Your brain has all these levels of information, but you can't access them Timothy, put down that water gun. No, I screamed, don't look at the child. Keep your eyes on the paper. The paper has the answer. For God's sakes, woman, you can do this. You're almost to the end of the... It was at that moment that the printout became drenched by a jet stream from Timothy's water pistol, and as the brainwave graph melted and merged into a soggy gray mass, we gazed out towards the pool. Timothy, give me that water gun now. Marge stared blankly into my eyes. Sorry, I can't remember what I was saying. That's all right, I sighed. I've forgotten your name.
Will Fan. It's been, as you said to me earlier, it's been a minute since we last had our paths crossing, and I'm so happy to welcome you here to The View from Abroad. You're dialing in from Singapore.
Sunny side, always ever. Thanks for having me on, Teresa.
Great. I am so glad you chose this column because it's fun for me to unpack this one with a man instead of another woman. You know, instead of a young mother, because I see pictures of you on LinkedIn and posts about how your life has changed since you've had your son and how your perspective on what's important has kind of evolved.
Yeah, he turns 12 months this week, little soul. And recently I've been talking a lot about the journey of fatherhood and building a business, and I'm glad that it's resonating with a lot of folks.
Yeah. Let's go back a generation. I look back to my parents, and I can remember probably when I came home with a not sparkling report card. I was not I was not the best student, but I can remember my dad, who was wonderful, just sitting me down and going, you know, honey, we all have our jobs in this family. And my job is to go to work and work at the office. And your mom's job is to work with the family and keep the home together. And your job is to go to school and do your homework. So there were pretty clear boundaries of who was going to be doing what. How about with your parents and your family? Was it, was your dad a hands-on dad, or was it more like what I just described?
So I've been thinking a lot about the relationship with my father. He's a very important guy in my life. But my parents, they were immigrants. They moved from Vietnam. My mom fled the Vietnamese War, passed through China, and then met my father in Sydney. He had just moved over from Hong Kong, and they met working as waiters and waitresses at a small Chinese restaurant, as a lot of immigrants do.
Yeah.
My father, Jack, he was a cab driver for 30 years. And so, he did what he needed to do. And I'd see him maybe, 6 hours, a week,
Wow.
Very little time. My mom was also the breadwinner. She'd work in corporate, or she'd work starting her own side hustle, side ventures. But my parents did what they could to send my older sister, myself, and my brother to good schools. And I'm just very grateful and thankful that this journey of, progress has been a big part of, my life.
Yeah. Wow. Did you and your wife talk about the division of labor before you had your baby, before your son came along?
So we run a business together. We've been running NewCampus for over 12 years. She was also my former boss at a consulting firm, Accenture, a few years before that. So there's already been some practice in place. But I do think, having built, a business with your life partner, it does make these tough conversations a lot easier. And most recently, we did a reorg of the family strategy where I'm, going to be focusing more on hand-to-hand combat with a little boy, and she focused on strategy. But through this process, I have, again, appreciated a lot about the mental load that comes with being a mother and all the invisible work that comes through, which is why this topic article resonated so much.
Wow. Right. What are some things that feel overwhelming as a hands-on dad? I mean, if you were going to put your finger on things that really, where you just feel like, okay, this is one of the toughest things about it.
I have really enjoyed the journey to date. And I talk about this a lot with my wife, in the windows before bed, having a wine and watching some, Netflix, before Sol wakes up an hour or 2 hours later.
Again.
We have a small window. But again, like, a lot of the mental burden is taken off my hands by Faye. And being in that grateful position where I don't need to worry about strategy or mid to long-term planning. She's thinking about schooling. She's thinking about Red Mart food delivery. She's thinking about diet. She's thinking about activities. She's thinking about play dates. All I need to do is show up, execute. All I need to do is bring him to the park and, work on these, milestones and meeting people and whatnot. So,
so what you're saying there is that your wife has kind of puts the plan together, and then you come in and you're the foot soldier.
We operate like a business. She's the CEO. I'm the head of operations and some business analysts along the way.
That's great. That's wonderful. But so, I mean, there was in that column that was for real. There, I mean, sometimes, it's poetic license and I can exaggerate things a little bit in those columns. But I was sitting by the swimming pool in Hong Kong with the kids in the water with this woman who showed me that she had gone to some studio somewhere where they washed her brain to help get rid of some of the superfluous crap in there, and showed me this chart of what, the before and after. Who knows what that was, but how about, technology's come so far today. What are some things that help as workarounds that you think for parents that have to do with technology?
So one thing I definitely appreciate a lot about Teresa is being in Singapore or, Hong Kong. Help goes such a long way. And it's why, there's such a high ratio of female CEOs or females in executive leadership, because they can hire a helper to deal with the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, picking up groceries and whatnot. And, we're just so thankful for the first time in our lives being in Singapore. We've brought on a helper and she's been phenomenal, giving us that extra 1 hour of sleep, or, taking Sol out when we need some calm to focus on work. But, with hiring and building a team, as you would in business, there's upskilling as well. And so ChatGPT, Claude have been our partners to figure out how do we, ensure that our helper is cooking in the right way, in terms of any, changes in Sol's health or his skin, or, he wakes up and something's not feeling right. You can really just, talk into your mobile phone and then get that initial feedback. And I don't think, my parents had that, expertise growing up, or when I was growing up,
That's a wonderful example of how technology can help. And listen, I mean, I can remember saying with girlfriends back when my kids were little, I didn't need a husband. I needed a wife. Because he was not he wasn't the hands-on. We didn't have the same setup that you and your wife have, And I can remember going back to the States and talking to friends of mine, and it was like, who had helpers? Nobody had helpers unless you were on Dynasty or, one of these, if you were living in a mansion, if you were a Kardashian, you would have a helper. But the normal folks like us didn't have the benefit of having somebody who lived in and was working, something like 6 days a week. Amazing.
So much has
truly
changed.
A blessing.
And, I do think a lot about this because a majority of my team are women, young women as well. Some already have kids, some are planning families, and everything from remote work to mat leave policies, that's only made it easier for young women to be successful in their careers and beyond. Even now, I work remotely from home, and in about 30 minutes, Sol will wake up. I will, prep his snack, spend some time with him, and then Faye's going to be coming back from the gym. So there's a lot of that balance they can, prep ahead. Granted, I'm only 1 year into this lifelong journey, but I do think It's a lot easier now, especially because of technology and, the way that we've, changed work and life.
Hey, listen, let's take a little break and talk to us a little bit about what you're doing on the work front, because I think it's interesting to unpack that. Okay, here we are. NewCampus. I've said it's sort of a new approach to what, like the MBA? Talk to me a little bit about this exciting business that you and your wife are running.
Thanks, Teresa. So we run one of the leading challenger universities, business schools in Southeast Asia. We serve a lot of tech companies that are growing rapidly. Most of these companies in Philippines, in Indonesia, in Vietnam have young leaders, young managers that are trying to figure out their feet too. We've impacted over 130,000 learners all across Asia. And a big part of our thesis was, how do you democratize leadership education and how do you actually support learning so it's accessible and impactful? Fast forward to 2026, we've been doing a lot more work in the investment space. So investing in other leadership academies, other education businesses all around the world. So, for me as the founder, CEO, head of school, I've seen that entire journey of, early stage learning all the way to late stage growth. And, again, this is part of my personal mission and drive to actually figure out what does that next iteration of future leaders look like.
Wonderful. And how do the people that are getting in touch with you to become involved, give me a profile. Give me a typical sketch of who is signing up for a NewCampus experience.
Yeah. So we actually work across the spectrum. We partner with governments. We partnered with over 400 universities. We work with over 600 tech companies in Southeast Asia. But more specifically on the management side, a lot of these companies have just exploded from 50, 100 to 1,000 employees. And think of a young 20-something leading a team for the first time. Their biggest challenge is, how do you switch from an individual contributor to running a product team of 10, 15? And so they would go through short courses, async materials, but more importantly, look at different ways on how their peers are leading young teams. From the investment side, we've essentially replicated the model. So we have a lot of exposure to great businesses in Latin America, in Africa, and the Middle East, doing the same thing, but focusing on their own regions, their own missions too. And so we have the financing part of supporting these business builders, these entrepreneurs, also try to scale their impact. And hopefully we're contributing along the way too.
So who is providing the actual content then? Do you have people on your team that are running the workshops or the courses?
Exactly. So we have a combination of, in-house trainers. We have external coaches, leaders that we bring in. A lot of the evolution of education technology now is obviously driven by AI. So, looking at AI coaches, AI-driven curriculum, the world and the way that we work is changing so rapidly. So, it's very important that we keep up as the world moves.
Fantastic. Let me give the a little plug here to the website so people that want to dig in and learn a little bit more can find you. It's www.newcampus.com. And now we're going to go back and hear the story from your own life that was somehow bubbled up by that crazy column. Okay, so here we are. Will Fan, thanks for sharing about NewCampus. Now it's time for you to share, if you will, a little story from your own experience that was stimulated by something in that column.
Yeah, what was quite resonating for me is, as a young father, what's completely changed around how I think about social networking is looking for other fathers. I recently started playing competitive basketball again. having been on hiatus for almost 7-8 years. But what's been drawing me into this community is you have these 40-something, 50-something dads that are finding that slither of time where they can, go back and stay fit and, obviously better themselves. I take my son to the pool on weekends and weekdays because in Singapore, there's not as much, opportunities to swim. But growing up in Australia, I used to swim competitively almost every morning. And so, being able to surround myself with these dads that show up has been so important for me. But, when you're both locked in on building a business and locked in on trying to be present for your father, there's always going to be that altitude decision making and context switch. And so, the points around, losing your way and, really getting lost in the moments, that's a big struggle that I need to, constantly, try to tackle on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah. What are the conversations like with the other dads?
It's always going to be a balance. I hosted a barbecue over the weekend, and it's, always contrasting to see dads that are just so focused on their career, and the career is number one, so it's a very segregated approach to what the mum and father's doing. And then you have dads that are hybrid like myself, and then you have dads that are fully immersed and integrated. And so, for me, it's again, just appreciating the spectrum of commitment and conviction in wanting to be there for your son or daughter. And, it's also finding what fits for me. When I think about my dad, even though he'd work from 6 a.m. and drive to 11 p.m. every night, he would always show up to my basketball games on Friday evening, and he would always drive my sister, my brother, and I to school between 7 to 7:30 in the morning. And when I kind of look back at his career, it wasn't, hyper growth, but he was just showing up day to day, earning his bucks, and to make sure there was food on the table. So, I think a lot about those values that I want to eventually translate back into my role as a father. And so that conflict on, okay, do you want to just work and make money so your family's looked after, or be present, show up, and, just do the best that you can?
I think I got a little choked up when you were talking about your dad. And because it makes me think about my dad too. He, he was an artist. He was a lettering artist. And at one point he worked for the telephone company, and they had an in-house art department, where they do things for events and promotions and stuff like that. And this was back in the 50s, 1950s, right? Early 60s. And then they outsourced that. And so he had to become a suit from being an artist working in a studio doing lettering on big now he was having to learn to be a public relations guy. And I know that was hard for him. He was an artist at heart. And that was a hard transition. But it was kind of what you're talking about with your own dad. He had to suit up and show up and do it, and did it. And was grateful that the company trained him to be able to take on that role. But it wasn't him being able to follow his passion. So we who have jobs and have had careers that were ones that made us fulfilled and happy, not just from a financial standpoint, but from an emotional and spiritual standpoint, are very, very blessed, because that's not the case for most people in the world. Most people are not showing up to a job that fulfills and makes them happy every day. Most people are just trying to get some food on the table and a roof over their heads, right? So I think that's a really beautiful thing to reflect on. In terms of, do you have anybody in that cohort of fathers? Because this was what happened with me too. You end up becoming friends with other mothers who have kids the same age, or because I was in Hong Kong for such a long time, friends that were my age, we were all having babies at the same time. So we had that in common. Do you have anybody in your cohort of young fathers that is a full-time dad that is has got that different shift. They're not focusing on work other than the work of being a dad.
I have a really good friend of mine. We used to be housemates, and when him and his partner lived with us, we lived together for I think 3-4 years. He was terrible with cleaning up. He was terrible with paying bills on time. And, it was always funny because I always saw him as, a great party friend. But now that he has 3 kids, he's probably been the most successful father that I've looked up to. He's working today, but he had taken 1 year off for each of his 3 kids when they were born. And that has shown in the way that his 3 kids are raised, their confidence, their ability to, emotionally regulate. And his mum, his partner, their mum, has been obviously phenomenal in playing the maternal card. And so I think a lot about that first year being super critical. And, for me now, being lucky enough to spend the days with Sol, my boy, I think a lot about how do you, again, be present, but also make time for yourself to be present. That's probably the biggest challenge that I've seen talking with other ambitious entrepreneurial dads, especially in this part of the world, Singapore, Hong Kong, where that work culture is so ingrained, where you prioritize, payments or cash flow or, moving up the career chain. And so, this guy, they're based in Australia now, has obviously shown that it does work, both managing a successful career, but giving yourself that time to just pause and just be there for your kid because, there's no right or wrong formula to create a family and nurture your kids. So I think that's something I'm coming to a lot of terms to. How do you make it your own way versus following a prescribed style?
Okay, one last question here. If you were going to give a little tip to somebody, a new father who doesn't have the luxury, perhaps, of time and a being the head of operations with a CEO mom in the background, what are 1 or 2 things that you think are the most important things to invest in time-wise with your kids?
You need to look after yourself before you can look after others. And one thing that Faye and I have been absolutely religious on is going to the gym. We do yoga together. We do Pilates. I play competitive basketball now, and still find time for the gym. And, obviously being a present father, but, being able to find that 30, 45-minute reset and refresh is so critical to have energy and stamina long term. Because there'll be nights where you stay awake until 4 a.m. There'll be days where, there's just going to be nagging and wailing and there's no way to get out, but you have to, stay focused mentally and physically. So, tip 1, focus on your fitness. And, with ClassPass and, all these different tools now, you can build it and there shouldn't be an excuse. I think the second is, as an expat, having lived abroad for over a decade now, there's always going to be that community. And, in the beginning, when Faye and I were traveling all around the world, it was hard for us to be rooted in a cohort of friends and family. But, now for the first time, since coming to Singapore in 2014, I do feel like we have such a strong, pool of people that we can lean in, ask for favors and, share notes and support. We hosted Sol's 1-year birthday and we had over 50 parents and kids show up and, be able to share that journey and wartime insight into what works and what doesn't. It's just so much fun. It makes the journey so much more rich.
Yeah, absolutely. And that whole thing, I think a big difference now is that I see is that men talk more openly and sincerely and vulnerably about what's hard for them with other men, which was something that there just didn't seem to be a space for that it was all, it was all suit up and show up and just put your head down and muscle through. And it's great if that is what I'm hearing from you, the experience of being able to be part of a community where you can lean in and go, I'm having a rough one today. I need to talk to somebody about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think, some of my strongest friendships now have been forged off the back of, these tough times as a father, as a parent. I do miss a lot about Australia because there's obviously a much bigger focus on family time and outdoors and, spending time with grandparents. But we also make do, as travelers, as creators, as builders, all around the world. We have to obviously find balance for ourselves to be successful. But also, how do we take our children along the way as part of their journey as well?
Hey, listen, it has been wonderful talking with you about this. Thank you so much, Will Fan. I'm going to just give NewCampus another little plug here. It is www.newcampus.com. The website's very interesting. I mean, I think it's such a great concept in terms of the investment in helping other campuses grow up around the world. That's just awesome. Terrific. Thanks for sharing your story. Hey, and if you are enjoying The View from Abroad, please take 30 seconds before you sign out to subscribe, to follow, and to comment on YouTube or Spotify or Apple, wherever that you're, getting in touch with us. And if you're feeling overwhelmed and struggling to keep all those plates spinning, whether you're parenting or whether it's something else in your life, you can pause for a second and just consider, what if it's good?